All right, everybody buckle up because this deep dive is going to be a heavy one. We're going deep into the transatlantic slave trade, but not the story you usually hear.
Right.
This one has a whole other layer. We're talking about Native American slaveholding.
Yeah, it's a really complex part of American history.
Totally.
And it's often overlooked.
Absolutely. And when we think about slavery in America, I mean, automatically our minds just go to
Yeah.
European colonists, right? Black and white. But it's
much bigger than that.
It's so much bigger.
Yeah.
It's so much bigger than that. And today we're looking at this paper, The Intersection of Native American Slaveholding and African American Ancestry During the Transatlantic Slave Trade.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating look at this.
Yeah, and it's well, we're going to get into that.
Definitely.
But it really does kind of
complicate
the whole story. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's not the simple narrative that we think we know.
No, not at all. And I think, what's really interesting about this is that while a lot of pre-colonial Native American societies did have systems of captivity, they were really different from the chattel slavery that the Europeans brought over.
Yeah.
And as that European influence spread, some Native American tribes really, unfortunately, adopted this really brutal system of owning people as property.
Yeah, and it's just, it's kind of mind-blowing, I mean, to think that we usually associate slavery with European colonists, not the Native Americans. And so why? Why would these tribes, why would they adopt a system that was so fundamentally different from their own traditions?
You really have to connect this to what was going on at the time, because these tribes were facing immense pressure from European colonizers.
Absolutely.
I mean, they were losing their land, their cultures, their whole way of life.
It was brutal.
Yeah, it was really brutal. And so some tribes started looking at this and saying, okay, well,
if you can't beat them, join them, kind of.
Yeah, almost like aligning with these practices.
Yeah.
Even ones as horrible as slavery as a way to demonstrate civilization to the colonizers, right?
Wow.
It was seen as like a survival tactic.
Wow. So it's like they were trapped. They had to make impossible choices just to exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, too, another thing that comes into play here is economics. Because, enslaved labor, especially on plantations, could really boost agricultural output.
Right.
And so there were some economic benefits that came along with that.
Sure.
For some of the wealthier tribal members.
It's just all so tangled up and complicated.
Yeah.
It's just layer after layer
Very complicated.
of just impossible situations. And the source also mentions, and this is where things get really heavy, is the sexual exploitation of enslaved African Americans by Native American slaveholders. And this is a tough subject.
Yeah, it is.
But it's something that we can't shy away from.
Absolutely.
It's there, and it's
uncomfortable, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And I think, sadly, the historical record really does show a pattern of sexual abuse and exploitation of the enslaved people within these communities, just as there was within European American communities.
And so what happened to the children that were born from these unions?
Right. So that's where it gets really complicated. It varied from tribe to tribe. Some of those children were integrated, but others, tragically, were kept enslaved.
Wow. I mean, can you imagine being born into this system where you're denied even the basic right to belong?
Absolutely. And these are stories, these are experiences that really deserve to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this just shows that history is never neat and tidy, is it?
No, it's never neat and tidy.
There's always these layers upon layers of complexity. And even when it's hard, we have to be willing to kind of peel back those layers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And confront the truth.
It's so important.
However uncomfortable.
Because only then can we really start to build a more honest and nuanced understanding of our past.
I think this has been a real education for me already, and we're just getting started.
We're just getting started, yeah. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah, there's so much more to explore about the intersection of this, of Native American slaveholding and African American ancestry.
Absolutely. And as we delve deeper, we're going to see how all of this continues to impact today.
Yeah.
Issues of identity, belonging, and justice.
Absolutely. And we'll get into all of that.
Yeah.
A little bit later.
Right after the break. Yeah, it really makes you rethink everything you thought you knew, right?
It really does.
Yeah.
So much of history is so much more complicated than the simple narratives we learn in school.
Right.
I mean, these are real people's lives.
Absolutely.
What happened after the Civil War? I mean, did emancipation change things for those who were enslaved by Native Americans? I mean, did they get the freedom and the recognition they deserved?
That's a really good question, and it kind of leads us to another complicated chapter of all this.
Okay.
So during Reconstruction, the U.S. government actually signed treaties with the Five Civilized Tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And these treaties required them to emancipate the people that they had enslaved.
Okay.
And to grant them citizenship in their nations.
Okay, so that sounds like a step in the right direction.
Yeah, it was. But it wasn't a simple process. It wasn't straightforward.
Right.
Remember, we're talking about deeply entrenched systems of power and prejudice.
Of course.
And so even though these freedmen, as they were called, were legally granted citizenship, they still often faced a lot of discrimination and struggled to be fully recognized as equal members of the tribes.
Wow. So even after emancipation?
Yeah.
The fight for equality continued?
Sadly, yes.
Right.
Integration wasn't smooth.
Right.
And some tribes really resisted embracing the freedmen.
Yeah.
And that resistance, that resistance manifested in a lot of different ways. Everything from social exclusion to even trying to limit their rights and access to resources.
Yeah. The source mentions the Cherokee Nation specifically as having a large freedmen population.
Yeah.
What were the dynamics like there?
Yeah. So the Cherokee Nation is a really powerful example of all this.
Yeah.
So initially they did grant freedmen full citizenship rights.
Okay.
But later on, there were these efforts to restrict those rights, which led to all these legal battles. And that actually continued to this day.
Wait, so you're telling me that this legacy of Native American slaveholding is still playing out in the 21st century?
It is. And it's a testament to how much these historical wounds haven't healed. I mean, the question of who belongs, who has rights, who gets to define tribal identity.
Yeah.
That's still fiercely debated within some Native American communities.
This whole deep dive is really challenging how I always thought about American history.
It's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you start digging deeper.
It's not just black and white, like I always thought.
Right. It's so much more nuanced than that.
Yeah. There are so many more layers to this.
Absolutely.
It's really incredible.
Yeah.
I have to admit, this is a lot to process. It's not just some historical event. These are real people's lives, families, whose lives were changed forever by these events.
And it's still happening?
And it's still happening.
It's still going on.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? What are the key takeaways from all this, from this deep dive into such a sensitive and often overlooked part of American history?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that history, it's rarely black and white, literally and figuratively. I think this story of Native American slaveholding really forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
And to really grapple with the complexity of the past.
It reminds us that even within marginalized communities, power dynamics can lead to oppression and exploitation.
Absolutely. And we tend to focus on these big picture narratives, but it's so important to remember that within those narratives are all these individual stories and motivations and choices that shape the course of events.
It also just highlights the fact that racism and prejudice can exist even within groups who have experienced oppression themselves.
Absolutely.
Like a reminder that none of us are immune to the dangers of prejudice.
Right.
And that we constantly have to challenge our own biases.
It's so important to really think about that.
It's also so important, like you were saying, to really seek out diverse perspectives and to challenge those traditional narratives that we think we know.
That often dominate our understanding of history.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to a part of history that I knew very little about.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. It really makes you wonder what other untold stories are out there.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of history. It's this never-ending journey of discovery.
Absolutely.
And as we uncover those hidden stories, we really gain a much richer and more nuanced understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It really has.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
I would encourage everyone to really continue to explore this topic on their own.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many resources out there.
Absolutely.
Books, articles, documentaries. Don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.
Yes.
challenge your assumptions, and just really engage in these thoughtful dialogues about this really difficult but really important part of our history.
We can't shy away from it.
We can't shy away from it.
We have to lean into this discomfort.
Absolutely. And it's through that discomfort that we can really learn and grow.
Absolutely. And through learning and understanding, we can begin to dismantle these systems of oppression that continue to affect our society. We all have a responsibility to know this history and to really work towards a more just and equitable future for everybody.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
And hopefully it's inspired them to keep digging deeper.
Absolutely.
And learning more about all these really fascinating and overlooked parts of American history.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. It's really incredible how much we can learn when we look at these kind of forgotten parts of history.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things that really strikes me about all of this is just the sheer resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
I mean, despite facing just unimaginable hardship and injustice, these freedmen and their descendants they kept fighting for their rights, for recognition, for their place in the world.
They really did.
Yeah.
And it's truly inspiring.
It's amazing. It's like they refused to be silenced or erased, even when they were facing just immense pressure and discrimination.
Yeah. And their story it's really a testament to the power of perseverance and that fight for equality.
And it also makes you realize that the fight for justice is never really over. I mean, here we are, 21st century. And the descendants of these freedmen are still
dealing with this,
grappling with the legacy of Native American slaveholding. They're still fighting for full recognition and inclusion.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought for sure. I mean, it reminds us that the past isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It really lives on in our present. It shapes our institutions,
of course,
our communities, even our identities.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive has really challenged me to rethink how I understand American history, the complexity of race and power and belonging.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It's a lot.
But it's so important to engage with these really tough topics.
Oh, absolutely.
Even when they make us uncomfortable, it's through that discomfort that we can really learn and grow.
And it's through learning and understanding that we can start to actually dismantle these systems of oppression that are still plaguing our society today.
Absolutely.
And we all have a responsibility to be aware of these histories and to work towards a more just and equitable future for everyone.
Absolutely. Well said.
It's been such a powerful conversation.
It really has.
Before we go, I want to encourage all of our listeners to continue this journey of discovery, read the books, explore all the resources out there, and have these open and honest conversations about these really complex issues.
I couldn't agree more. I think we need to keep asking those questions.
Yeah.
Challenge the assumptions and just keep striving for a deeper understanding of our history and the legacies that shape our world today.
This has been an amazing deep dive. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for listening. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.